He was a billionaire walking to the most important meeting of his career, until a barefoot boy with ice-blue eyes stepped in front of him and said, "Please, my sister's dying." That was the moment everything changed. The city pulsed with the rhythm of morning rush, its towering skyscrapers reflecting the gray of the overcast sky. Michael Carter, clad in a sharply tailored charcoal suit, descended the marble steps of the Carter Tech building, the headquarters of his billion-dollar tech empire. A sleek black limousine waited at the curb, engine idling, his driver already holding the door open. Michael glanced briefly at his watch. He had precisely 12 minutes to reach the Upper East Side, where a private conference room filled with international investors awaited him. A deal was on the table that could multiply his company's value overnight. Time, as always, was currency, and his was booked down to the second. Just as he stepped toward the car, a small voice cut through the hum of traffic and sidewalk chatter. "Sir, excuse me, sir." He didn't stop at first. He never did. People tried to talk to him all the time, begging, selling, pleading. But this voice had an odd urgency, quiet yet piercing. Michael's eyes, ice blue and analytical, finally landed on the source. A boy stood there, no more than 8 years old. Thin. Blonde. A winter jacket several sizes too big hung off his frame. His shoes were mismatched, one sneaker duct-taped at the toe. But what caught Michael off guard were the boy's eyes, almost identical to his own in color. Pale blue, solemn, ancient in a way a child's eyes shouldn't be. "Please," the boy said again. "My sister, she's very sick. We need help." Michael blinked, trying to compose his thoughts. He was late. This was a scam. It had to be. But something stopped him from brushing the boy off. Maybe it was the way he stood, not pitiful, but proud, determined. Maybe it was the strain in his voice, as if he had repeated these same words 1,000 times but still wasn't used to saying them. "How much are you asking for?" Michael asked, his tone clipped. The boy hesitated. $1,324, he said with painful precision. Michael raised an eyebrow. Not a round number. Not 1,000, or 500. It was exact, alarmingly exact. And somehow, that made it worse. "I don't have time," Michael said, beginning to move again. But the boy stepped forward, just enough to make him pause. "I don't want your money," the boy said quickly. "I want someone to come with us. Just to see. Even for a minute. I'm doing everything I can, but I don't know what else to do. She's only 6. She hasn't eaten since yesterday. I think she's getting worse." Michael exhaled, frustrated with himself. Why was he still listening? "Where's your mother?" he asked. "She died 2 months ago," the boy replied, flatly. "Cancer. Dad left before that. It's just us now." Michael's chest tightened, though he couldn't explain why. This wasn't his problem. He didn't do charity like this. His donations were strategic, anonymous, filtered through foundations and managed by advisors. He didn't walk into the lives of strangers. He didn't break routine. He certainly didn't go wandering off with homeless children from the street. But still, he looked past the boy and saw her. She sat curled up on a wooden bench by the wall of the building. A little girl, hair pale as snow, head tilted forward, small shoulders trembling. Her skin was nearly translucent, lips tinged slightly blue, eyes half closed as if sleep and sickness were pulling her down in equal measure. Michael froze. In her fragile frame, he saw something, not just illness, but resignation. And in the boy's eyes, he saw the unbearable burden of being a child forced to be a parent. His driver called his name, but Michael didn't respond. For the first time in years, he turned off his phone, tucked it into his pocket, and said quietly, "All right. Take me to her." Alex walked quickly, glancing over his shoulder now and then as if making sure Michael was still following. The sidewalk narrowed as they moved away from the glass towers and designer storefronts of Midtown, and the streets grew quieter, rougher. Trash clung to the corners of alleyways. The shine of the city was replaced by peeling paint, rusted fire escapes, and shuttered storefronts. Michael kept pace silently, his polished shoes clicking against cracked pavement, a stark contrast to the boy's uneven, shuffling steps. He didn't know what he was doing. Every instinct told him this was a mistake, a detour into something that had nothing to do with him. He was a businessman, not a social worker. But something about the boy's eyes, the urgency and honesty in them, made it impossible to turn back. "What's her name again?" Michael asked after a moment. "Emma," Alex said without turning his head. "She's 6. She's been coughing all night. I gave her the last pill this morning. I don't think it's working anymore." "What kind of pill?" "Amoxicillin. It's for infections, right? I found some in a first aid kit at a shelter. But it's old. I don't know if it's good still." Michael almost said something, almost corrected him, but stopped himself. What was the point? A child should never be in a position to make decisions like that. He realized suddenly just how quiet Alex had become. The boy was moving fast, but his breathing was shallow. Tense. Focused. He wasn't walking with an adult. He was leading one, like he had done it before, too many times. They turned a corner onto a block with a row of narrow, crumbling buildings. The city seemed to forget these places existed. Alex stopped at the bottom of a stairwell leading into a basement-level apartment, barely marked, a dented mailbox hanging open beside the door. "This is it," he said. Michael looked down at the narrow concrete steps and the rusted railing. He hesitated, then followed the boy inside. The door creaked open with a soft metallic groan. The air inside was stale and cold. The room was small and dark, lit only by the gray light seeping through a dirty window near the ceiling. A pile of blankets lay in the far corner. The smell of old food, damp clothes, and something faintly sour hung in the air. Emma was there, wrapped tightly in a tattered blanket with faded cartoon characters on it. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly open, each breath shallow and effortful. Her hair was stuck to her forehead in damp strands, and her tiny hands clutched at the blanket like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. Michael stood still. He'd seen poverty in reports, statistics, charts. But never like this. Not this close. Not this human. Alex moved quickly to his sister's side, kneeling beside her and brushing her hair back from her face with a gentleness that no child his age should have needed to learn. "She was okay this morning," he said quietly, as if trying to convince himself more than Michael. "But now she won't talk. She's tired all the time. And her skin's cold." Michael crouched beside them, one knee on the cold floor, and touched Emma's forehead. It was clammy. She was burning from within, and still freezing to the touch. Something deep in his memory stirred, his mother's hands doing the same for him when he had pneumonia as a child, when they had been between apartments, living in shelters. He had forgotten that night, or maybe buried it. He stood up suddenly, pulling out his phone, turning it back on. "I'm calling an ambulance," he said firmly. Alex's head shot up. "No. Please, don't. They'll take us away. I've heard what happens. They'll put us in different places." Michael didn't answer right away. He looked down at the boy, really looked. He saw someone who had survived too much, who had become protector and provider far too young. But he also saw the desperation, the helplessness that even determination couldn't hide anymore. "They won't," Michael said slowly. "Not if I'm with you." Alex didn't speak, but his eyes didn't leave Michael's face. He didn't nod. He didn't move. But something in his shoulders released the tiniest bit of tension. Michael made the call. His voice was calm, authoritative. Within minutes, he had not only requested an ambulance but had called his personal physician and put a team on standby. While he waited, he asked Alex when they had last eaten. The boy shrugged. "I gave her the last of the cereal yesterday. I'm not hungry." Michael said nothing. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stood silently as the wail of the siren approached in the distance. When the medics arrived, Alex flinched. Michael placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "She's going to be okay," he said. Alex didn't respond. But when they carried Emma out, and the boy tried to follow barefoot, Michael didn't hesitate. He picked him up, wrapped him in his coat, and carried him out into the daylight. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the exact moment everything began to change. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a metallic thud as the paramedics secured Emma inside, carefully attaching monitors and whispering to one another in that urgent, quiet language only medical professionals seemed to understand. Michael stood beside the vehicle, the cold air nipping at his neck despite his tailored coat. He had barely said a word during the short ride from the basement apartment to the curb, his mind running calculations, not financial, but logistical, human, fragile. He had called ahead to St. Grace Medical Center, bypassing the emergency intake queue entirely. The hospital administrator had recognized his name immediately and assured him a team would be waiting. Still, he felt like he'd lost control of the moment, and for someone like Michael Carter, that was unfamiliar ground. Alex stood to his left, still wrapped in the coat Michael had draped over his shoulders earlier. The sleeves were far too long, and he held them clumsily in one hand, like a kid clutching a costume that didn't quite fit. His other hand was clenched in a fist, his face frozen in that same quiet alertness, always bracing for something bad to happen. The boy had refused to get in the ambulance, insisting on sitting up front with Michael, refusing to leave his sister behind but also unwilling to trust the medics completely. Not without someone there to watch. Now, as the doors closed and the engine rumbled to life, Alex looked up. "Where are they taking her?" "St. Grace," Michael replied. "It's a good hospital. One of the best." "Are they going to fix her?" "They're going to do everything they can." Alex didn't ask more. He just nodded, slowly, then turned his eyes back to the flashing lights as the ambulance pulled into traffic. Michael gestured toward his own car, which had followed them from the city. The driver was already stepping out, clearly uncertain what was happening but wise enough not to ask questions. Michael opened the back door himself, motioning to Alex. "Come on. We'll be right behind her." Alex hesitated, staring at the black leather seats and polished chrome like it was some kind of trap. Eventually, he slid inside, cautious and rigid. Michael followed, pulling the door shut behind them, sealing off the city noise. Inside the car, silence settled. Michael watched the boy from the corner of his eye. He sat stiffly, hands balled into fists in his lap, eyes fixed on the passing city through the window, as though memorizing the streets just in case he had to run again. Michael wanted to say something, anything, to soften the edge in the air, but every phrase that came to mind felt hollow. He didn't know how to talk to children, especially not ones who had seen too much. After a few minutes, Alex spoke. "You don't have to stay. You helped already." Michael turned to him. "I want to." "Why?" It was such a simple question, but it hit like a punch. Michael didn't know. He had walked away from countless people in need, stepped over stories like Alex's in subway stations and news articles without blinking. So why had he stopped today? Why had this boy's voice pierced a shell nothing else had managed to crack? "I don't know yet," he answered truthfully. Alex gave a small shrug, as if that response made more sense to him than any well-rehearsed speech. When they arrived at the hospital, the emergency entrance was already cleared for them. 2 nurses and a doctor greeted Michael with practiced efficiency, though their eyes widened when they saw the boy emerge beside him. Michael gave them Emma's name, age, symptoms, and the approximate duration of her illness with more precision than even the intake nurse expected. He was used to leading teams, issuing instructions, reading between lines. But here, he felt utterly powerless. Every detail Alex had told him played back in his mind: old antibiotics, shared meals, the dusty mattress on a concrete floor, and it all made his chest tighten. Emma had been taken straight into pediatric ICU. It was serious. No one said it aloud, but the way the nurses moved, fast, deliberate, said enough. The waiting room outside the unit was empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale yellow glow over the gray chairs and outdated magazines. Michael sat without speaking. Alex didn't fidget. He simply watched the double doors at the end of the hallway, as if willing them to open and bring good news. A nurse finally returned, informing them that Emma had stabilized enough for testing. They needed to run scans, check her lungs, evaluate potential damage to her heart. Michael asked if he could speak to the doctor directly. The nurse nodded, clearly familiar with people like him, important men used to getting answers. When the doctor arrived, a young woman with tired eyes and sharp movements, she seemed surprised by how many questions Michael asked and how closely he listened. But what struck her most was how he always turned to Alex after each answer, checking that the boy understood too. Not once did he speak over him or ignore his presence. Not once did he treat him like a child to be dismissed. After the doctor left, Michael turned to Alex. "We'll stay here until she wakes up. Then we'll decide the next step." "You don't have to," Alex repeated. "I know," Michael said. "But I want to." Alex didn't respond, but this time, something in his face shifted. The rigid tension in his posture relaxed, just slightly. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in something closer to relief. Michael stood and walked to the vending machine. He returned with a bottle of juice and a pack of crackers, setting them beside the boy without a word. He didn't ask if he was hungry. He knew better by now. He simply offered. Alex stared at the food for a long time. Then, slowly, without a word, he opened the bottle and took a sip. Michael leaned back in his chair, watching the hallway. He had missed his meeting. Lost a major investor. Delayed a launch. In any other context, that would have been a disaster. But right now, none of it mattered. Because something strange and deeply unfamiliar had taken root in him, not pity, not guilt, but something more dangerous. He cared. And it was already too late to turn back. The next morning arrived slowly, dragging gray light through the windows of the hospital waiting room. Michael hadn't left his chair all night. He hadn't slept. His suit jacket was draped over the back of the plastic seat beside him, his tie loose around his neck. His usually sharp appearance was replaced by a quiet disarray, though he hardly noticed. His attention had remained fixed on the same sterile white doors that led to the pediatric ICU, where Emma had been since the previous afternoon. Doctors came and went. Nurses offered updates. But the truth remained: she was holding on, but only just. Beside him, Alex had curled into the chair with his knees tucked up, the oversized coat still wrapped tightly around him. He hadn't cried. Not once. But sleep had finally won over, and now his head rested against Michael's side, rising and falling gently with each of Michael's breaths. The boy looked impossibly small in the sterile, adult space around him. Michael's phone buzzed quietly on the seat beside him. He glanced at it and saw a long string of missed calls, messages, emails. His assistant had sent urgent texts all through the night, trying to rebook the investor meeting, report on stock fluctuations, and follow up on a PR inquiry after someone had seen him enter the hospital with a child. Michael didn't open any of them. The world he had built, the world of contracts, equity, and perpetual motion, suddenly felt unrecognizable. A nurse appeared at the doors and quietly waved him over. Michael rose slowly, careful not to disturb Alex, and followed her down the hall. The doctor from the day before met him near the nurse's station, holding a clipboard and speaking in the cautious, measured tone that doctors use when they aren't sure how much to soften the truth. "She made it through the night," she said. "But the infections moved into her lungs. We've got her on oxygen and fluids, but her heart's showing signs of stress. It may not be just the pneumonia. We're seeing irregular rhythms. We need to transfer her to pediatric cardiology for a full workup. If it's what we think, it could be congenital. Or triggered by the virus. Either way, she's not out of danger. Michael nodded, absorbing each word like a command. What do you need? We've got a specialist on call, but if there's someone else you want to bring in. There is, Michael said, already pulling out his phone. He didn't hesitate this time. He called Dr. Lena Brooks, a pediatric cardiologist from Boston who had once led a trial Michael had partially funded years ago. They had only spoken twice, but he remembered her intelligence and her lack of patience for bureaucracy. He knew she was direct, talented, and unafraid to take risks. Within 15 minutes, he had secured a helicopter flight and coordinated her arrival. Money didn't matter right now. Not to him. What mattered was time, and Emma was running out of it. After making the arrangements, Michael returned to the waiting room. Alex was awake, sitting up with his hands pressed together in his lap. He looked at Michael silently, as if preparing for bad news. She's stable, Michael said gently. But they need to run more tests. Her heart's tired. They're bringing in someone who can help. Alex didn't react at first. Then, almost inaudibly, he whispered, she always said it hurt when she ran too much. I thought she was just tired. I didn't know. Michael sat down beside him and shook his head. It's not your fault. Alex stared at the floor. If I'd gotten the money earlier, if I hadn't waited. No, Michael said, firmer this time. Listen to me. None of this is your fault. You've done more for her than most grown-ups could have. You kept her alive. You kept her safe. That's not a failure, Alex. That's love. The boy's eyes flicked toward him for just a second, then dropped again. He didn't argue. Later that afternoon, the hospital arranged for Emma's transfer to the cardiac unit. Michael rode with her in the elevator, watching the machines that monitored her heartbeat, every beep feeling like a tiny verdict. When they reached the new floor, he helped coordinate her intake, speaking directly to the head nurse and ensuring every test was scheduled without delay. He noticed the way staff treated him differently now, not just because of his name, but because of how personally he was involved. He wasn't writing checks from a distance. He was here. Every hour. Every moment. When Dr. Brooks finally arrived, windblown and serious, she didn't waste time. Michael gave her a rundown of the situation in under 2 minutes. She nodded once and immediately entered the room to examine Emma herself. For nearly an hour, Michael and Alex waited outside, silent. Michael offered to get food, but Alex shook his head. He sat with his arms folded tightly, staring down the hallway like a guard on post. Finally, Brooks came out and motioned for Michael to join her. She led him to a small office, where she laid out the details with clinical precision. She has myocarditis, likely viral-induced. The inflammation is weakening her heart's ability to pump. If we don't intervene, she could go into heart failure. Michael stayed quiet, letting the weight of that settle. She needs surgery, he asked. Not yet. First, we need to reduce the inflammation. That means antivirals, steroids, and close monitoring. If we don't see improvement within 48 hours, then yes, we'll have to consider surgical options. Possibly even a transplant, depending on how she responds. Michael didn't hesitate. Do whatever you need. Full resources. Equipment. Staff. Fly them in if you have to. I don't care what it costs. Brooks nodded. She's lucky to have someone like you. That kind of access makes a difference. Michael didn't say anything. He didn't correct her assumption. Because the truth was, he didn't even know what he was to Emma. A stranger? A benefactor? A temporary guardian? All he knew was that walking away now would feel like betrayal. When he returned to the waiting area, Alex was still there. Waiting. Watching. He didn't ask what the doctor said. He didn't need to. He could read it on Michael's face, not hopeless, but serious. Heavy. "I want to stay here," Alex said quietly. "You will," Michael replied. "We both will." And so they stayed. Through the tests, the transfusions, the whispered conferences among doctors in corners. Michael made calls between check-ins, not to clients or colleagues, but to lawyers, to child services, to people who could help him make this situation official. Because somewhere between the boy's first plea on the sidewalk and the second night sleeping in hospital chairs, Michael Carter had made a decision. He wasn't just going to save Emma. He was going to save both of them. The rain started sometime after midnight, a quiet, persistent drizzle that tapped against the hospital windows like it was trying to be heard without drawing attention. The city lights beyond the glass were blurred and soft, muted by the fog creeping over the skyline. Inside the cardiac wing of St. Grace, the world felt smaller, slower. Monitors beeped rhythmically in nearby rooms, and the hallway lights remained dimmed, casting long shadows that made everything seem older, more worn. Michael sat beside Emma's hospital bed. She looked impossibly small under the thin blankets, wires and 4 lines snaking across her chest like threads in a delicate web. Her breathing had steadied with the help of oxygen, and the swelling around her heart had slightly gone down. She was resting, maybe even sleeping, though her eyelids fluttered from time to time like she was caught between dreams and fever. The doctors had said the next 24 hours were critical. Either her body would respond to the treatment, or they'd have to escalate to something more invasive. Michael had already cleared the way for that possibility. Whatever she needed, she would have. But for now, it was a waiting game. And Michael Carter hated waiting. Across the room, Alex sat in a chair too big for him, his arms folded tightly around himself like he was trying to hold himself together by force. He hadn't slept since Emma had been moved here. Even when nurses offered him blankets or encouraged him to lie down, he stayed alert, his gaze glued to his sister's face as if sheer willpower could keep her alive. Michael watched him quietly for a long time, then finally broke the silence. "Alex, do you want to take a walk? Just to stretch your legs. The nurses can sit with her." Alex shook his head immediately. "I'm not leaving her again. Not even for a minute." Michael didn't push. He understood. Instead, he leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees, letting out a slow breath. "You know," he said after a pause, "you remind me of someone I used to know." Alex turned his head, curious but cautious. "Who?" "Myself," Michael replied. "A long time ago. Before the suits. Before the company. Before anyone knew my name." Alex didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Michael took that as permission to continue. "I grew up in Michigan," he said. "Just me and my mom. We moved around a lot. Slept in churches sometimes. Shelters. She cleaned houses and worked night shifts when she could. We had weeks where we didn't know where the next meal would come from. There was a winter we spent 3 nights in the back of a car with no heat. I remember trying to make her laugh, even when I was cold and scared, because I thought if she smiled, maybe things would get better." Alex listened without interrupting. His face didn't change, but Michael could tell he was listening with more than just his ears. He was weighing every word. "I was about your age when she got sick," Michael continued. "Pneumonia. We didn't have insurance. I tried to take care of her myself. Got her aspirin, made her tea, even stole cold medicine from a pharmacy. Thought I was being brave. Thought I could save her. But I couldn't. She died in her sleep, on a couch in someone else's apartment. And I was alone." This time, Alex's mouth opened just slightly. His voice was small, rough. "What happened to you after?" I got put into the system, Michael said. Foster homes, some good, some not. I fought my way through school. Worked 3 jobs. I kept telling myself I'd make it out, and when I did, I'd never look back. And I didn't. I buried that part of me so deep I forgot it existed. Until I saw you too. Alex looked down at his hands. For the first time since they met, his shoulders slumped in a way that wasn't defensive or guarded. It was the posture of someone who had been holding on too tightly for too long. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said quietly. I watched videos on how to give medicine. I rationed our food. I taught her how to read. I did everything I could. Michael leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. You did more than most adults would have, Alex. You're not just her brother. You've been her protector, her caretaker, her whole world. No one should have to carry that alone, but you did. And she's still here because of you. Alex bit his lip hard, as if trying to stop himself from crying. But one tear escaped, sliding silently down his cheek. He wiped it away fast, like he thought Michael didn't see. I was afraid if I told anyone, they'd take her away, he whispered. Split us up. Michael nodded slowly. You were right to be afraid. The system can be harsh. But I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen. You're not alone anymore. Neither of you. For a long moment, there was no sound except the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Then Alex asked, barely audible, why are you doing this? You don't know us. You didn't have to stop. Michael looked at him and answered honestly. Because I remember what it's like to be invisible. To need someone and have no one. And because I think I was supposed to stop. Maybe everything I've built, everything I've done, was leading me to this. To you. Alex stared at him, not with disbelief, but with something closer to disbelief at hope itself, like he wanted to believe it but had been burned too many times before. Michael stood and moved toward the window. The rain was still falling, gentler now, the city glowing faintly beneath the clouds. He didn't speak again for a long time. He just stood there, watching the drops slide down the glass, thinking about all the years he had spent pretending the past didn't matter. Now, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, next to a boy who had carried the world on his shoulders and a girl fighting to breathe, that past was no longer a weight to avoid. It was a reason to stay. The sun broke through the clouds on the 3rd morning, casting thin, golden light across the windows of the pediatric cardiac unit. Emma was still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with a bit more ease, her skin no longer pale gray but returning to something closer to pink. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The inflammation around her heart had begun to respond to the treatment, and her oxygen levels had stabilized overnight. It wasn't a miracle, but it was the first real sign that her body was fighting back. Michael sat beside her bed, exhausted but focused, listening carefully as Dr. Brooks gave him a detailed update. He nodded, asked a few follow-up questions, and then, quietly, thanked her before turning his attention back to the child in the bed. He didn't speak for a while. He simply sat there, letting himself feel something he had rarely allowed in his adult life, relief. Down the hall, Alex was eating toast and applesauce in the cafeteria with a nurse who had taken a liking to him. She had coaxed him into eating something after 2 days of refusal. Michael had given him space that morning, sensing that the boy needed a moment to be just that, a boy, not a caretaker. Still, he kept a watchful eye, always nearby, always listening. He returned to the waiting room to make a few quiet calls. First, he spoke with his legal team, instructing them to begin the paperwork for emergency guardianship. He didn't want the state intervening or removing the children into separate systems. He wanted custody. Permanently, if possible. He didn't know what kind of parent he would be, but he knew he could offer something better than the streets, better than fear, better than the silence of not knowing what would happen next. After that, he called his assistant and gave strict instructions: no media contact, no press releases, and no interviews. If any reporter tried to spin this as a PR move, he wanted it shut down immediately. He didn't care what it cost. This wasn't about his image. What surprised him most, however, was how quickly the company began to adjust in his absence. The COO had stepped up to handle operations, investors were reassured by his direct message that the company's future was still on track, and several clients had even sent personal messages of support after hearing he was at the hospital with 2 children. He hadn't intended for any of this to be public, but news traveled fast, especially when someone as high-profile as Michael Carter was involved. Still, for once in his life, he didn't care about the headlines. Later that afternoon, Michael stepped outside for the first time in days, just to feel the air. The city sounded different now. Softer, somehow. The sharpness of his daily life, the noise, the competition, the pressure, had faded into the background. He leaned against the brick wall of the hospital and looked up at the sky, wondering what his mother would think if she could see him now. Would she be proud? Would she believe that he had made something of himself? Or would she see right through the titles and numbers, straight into the little boy who had once cried himself to sleep in the back seat of a rusted sedan? When he returned upstairs, he found Alex sitting beside Emma's bed again. She had stirred a little and opened her eyes for the first time since being admitted. Her voice was a faint whisper, but she had said his name. Just Alex, nothing more. But it was enough to bring tears to the boy's eyes, which he quickly wiped away with his sleeve. Michael watched them quietly from the doorway for a moment, heart tight in his chest. He walked in slowly, placed a hand gently on Alex's shoulder, and said, "She's getting better. That's her strength, and yours too." Alex looked up at him, eyes tired but clear. "You really think we'll be okay?" Michael nodded. "I don't just think it. I'll make sure of it." That evening, Michael arranged a meeting with a representative from Child Protective Services. He didn't send a lawyer to do it for him, he sat down in person, laid out the full story, and made it clear he intended to adopt both children. He provided everything, his records, home information, personal letters of recommendation. He told the truth about how he met them. He didn't sugarcoat anything. At the end of the meeting, the woman, stern but kind, looked at him and said, "We don't often see people like you walking into this system willingly." Michael replied simply, "Maybe that's the problem." Back at the hospital, Emma was sleeping again, but with more peace than before. Her breathing was quieter, her body no longer tensed in pain. Alex had finally fallen asleep too, this time curled in a blanket on a couch in the corner of the room, his mouth slightly open, one arm hanging off the edge. Michael watched over them both in the darkened room, the only sound coming from the monitor beside the bed and the faint hum of the heating system. He didn't feel like a CEO right now. He didn't feel like a billionaire or a strategist or a public figure. He just felt like a man who had found something unexpected, something real. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt anchored. He knew there would be complications. He knew this path would be long, possibly difficult, filled with legal processes and emotional recovery and more questions than answers. But he didn't care. These children weren't a detour from his life anymore. They were his life now. Spring came slowly that year, as if the city had needed time to thaw not just from winter, but from something deeper. The snow melted in hesitant drips, the trees bloomed in tentative bursts, and the streets warmed beneath skies that had been gray for far too long. It had been nearly 3 months since Emma's worst night in the ICU, and life had begun to unfold again, carefully, quietly, as if afraid to startle anyone awake. For Michael Carter, those 3 months had reshaped his world completely. He had temporarily stepped back from his company, delegating day-to-day responsibilities to his executive team and limiting his appearances to only the most essential board meetings. It was the first time in over a decade that his calendar wasn't filled with travel, strategy sessions, or investor calls. Instead, it now included things like school tours, legal paperwork, medical appointments, and late-night cereal runs when Alex suddenly remembered he needed something for a school project the next day. His Manhattan penthouse, once a symbol of solitary success, had been sold quietly in April. In its place, he purchased a house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, a large, old home with a wraparound porch, a wide lawn, and trees that rustled gently even when the wind wasn't blowing hard. It was a place with room to breathe. Emma had recovered slowly but steadily. Her heart, once fragile and unpredictable, had responded to the medication regimen better than the doctors had hoped. There were still frequent checkups and dietary restrictions, and she tired more easily than other children her age, but she smiled now. She played. She laughed out loud. The first time she giggled at a cartoon while sitting beside him on the couch, Michael had to excuse himself to the kitchen just to breathe. He hadn't expected how much sound her laughter would make in his chest. It rattled something loose that he hadn't realized was still locked up. Alex had taken longer to settle. He didn't trust comfort easily. He still asked questions before falling asleep: where will we be tomorrow, are the doors locked, what if Emma gets sick again? But his questions were beginning to shift. He had started asking about school, about Michael's childhood, about how computers worked. Michael had bought him a refurbished laptop, and within weeks Alex was teaching himself to code with a quiet intensity that reminded Michael of his own younger self, driven, focused, needing control in a world that had offered so little of it. The legal adoption process moved slower than Michael wanted. He had hired the best family law team in the state, but there were bureaucratic delays, background checks, and endless interviews with social workers. Every time someone used the phrase, potential placement, Michael clenched his jaw. This wasn't a placement. This was a family. Still, he endured every form, every visit, every interview with the same level of dedication he had once brought to global product launches. Except now, the stakes weren't about profit, they were about permanence. It was during one of those visits, when a caseworker came to the new house and watched Michael make grilled cheese while Emma colored at the kitchen island and Alex read a novel on the stairs, that something changed. The caseworker, a woman in her 40s with tired but kind eyes, stayed longer than she needed to. Before she left, she looked at Michael and said, "You know, most people with your resources pay someone else to raise their kids." He looked up from the sink and replied quietly, "That's the difference. They're not someone else's kids anymore." A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail with a court date. The final adoption hearing was scheduled for late May. When Michael told Alex, the boy didn't say anything at first. He just stared out the window, then finally asked, "Does that mean we get to stay forever?" Michael, without hesitation, answered, "Yes. As long as you want to. This is your home now." In early May, Michael was invited to speak at a private philanthropy summit. It was the first time he'd agreed to stand behind a podium in months. His speech was supposed to be about leadership, innovation, and corporate responsibility. But when he walked onto the stage, suit pressed, eyes calm, he paused for a moment and said something different. He told them about a boy who had stopped him outside his building, about a girl with a fever and a fragile heart, and about how 1 minute, just 1 minute of not looking away, had changed everything. The audience was stunned. Some were moved. Others looked confused, unsure how to reconcile the man on stage with the image they had previously held of him. But Michael didn't care. He wasn't telling the story for their approval. He was telling it because it mattered. Because silence had never saved anyone. That same week, he launched a new initiative under his foundation, called One Chance. It was dedicated to supporting homeless children, undocumented minors, and siblings at risk of separation in the foster system. Unlike most foundations, One Chance offered not just funding, but legal representation, transitional housing, education pathways, and on-site mental health care. When asked why he had started it, Michael simply said, "Because no child should have to prove they're worth saving." Back home, the house felt full in ways money couldn't buy. Mornings were loud and unpredictable. Alex had a habit of leaving books in the refrigerator for no reason. Emma liked to sing to herself while brushing her teeth. Michael found himself waking up early just to sit in the kitchen and listen to the quiet before their footsteps filled the space. Sometimes he caught himself smiling for no reason at all, just because they were in the room. One night, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had settled into a deep stillness, Michael stood by the window in his study, looking out at the moonlight. His phone buzzed, another email, another investor pitch, another world tugging at the edges of his attention. He let it buzz. He didn't open it. Instead, he walked down the hallway, past family photos that were only months old but already full of meaning, and gently opened the door to check on Emma and Alex. They were both fast asleep, their breathing soft and steady. He stood there for a while, just watching. Not guarding. Not planning. Just being there. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had to move forward. For the first time, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The morning of the adoption hearing dawned with clear skies and warm sunlight pouring over the quiet neighborhood like a quiet blessing. The air smelled of lilacs and cut grass, and the whole world seemed to hum softly, as if even the birds knew something important was happening. Inside the house, the energy was different. It wasn't rushed or chaotic, but charged with anticipation, like the feeling before a curtain rises or just before a team steps onto the field. Everything was calm on the surface, but underneath, something monumental was taking shape. Michael was already awake when the alarm clock buzzed. He didn't need it. He had barely slept the night before, though not from anxiety. It was something closer to awe, the strange and surreal realization that a decision he had made only months earlier, a decision born from an impulse, a moment of hesitation on a city sidewalk, had led them here. It was hard to believe that something so small had become so massive, that a single step toward a sick child and her desperate brother had become the foundation for an entirely new life. He made coffee quietly in the kitchen, wearing a blue dress shirt without a tie, sleeves rolled up. The house was still dim, shadows stretching across the floors, and for a few moments, he let himself just breathe in the stillness. Upstairs, Alex was already awake too. He stood at the window of his bedroom, the same room that Michael had painted for him in navy and gray, with a full wall covered in a map of the world. He had once stared at that map like it was a plan for escape. Now it felt more like a future to build. He pulled on a button-down shirt that Michael had ironed for him the night before and tried to flatten his unruly blonde hair, which always seemed to stick up no matter how much water he used. There was a seriousness in his expression, but something else too, relief. A sense of landing, like a plane that had finally touched ground after flying through turbulence for far too long. In the next room, Emma sat on her bed while Michael helped her with her white sandals. Her dress was soft and yellow, with tiny embroidered flowers, and her blonde hair had been tied into two small braids that framed her face. She was still thinner than most kids her age, her body marked by the illness she had fought so bravely, but her eyes were bright and curious, and her laugh, when it came, was full and unbroken. She asked, "Will it hurt?" and Michael smiled, kneeling beside her. "Not at all," he said. "It's just a lot of people saying yes." When they arrived at the courthouse, the security guards recognized Michael immediately and gave him a polite nod. They had probably expected a high-powered attorney or a corporate legal matter. Instead, he walked in hand with two children, one on each side, like any father would. The courtroom itself was small, more like a conference room than a dramatic chamber of justice. It was quiet, with high ceilings, wooden benches, and soft yellow walls. There were no cameras, no reporters, no audience. Just a judge, two attorneys, a representative from Child Services, and the three of them. Michael had been in countless rooms like this before, contract negotiations, boardroom showdowns, legal battles over billions, but none of those ever made his palms sweat. Today, they did. Because this wasn't about business. This was about belonging. The judge, a middle-aged woman with gray hair pulled into a low bun, looked over her glasses and smiled at the children before glancing down at the paperwork. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, as she read aloud the statements confirming Michael's eligibility, his intent to adopt, the evaluations, and the agency recommendations. It was a process Michael could have recited in his sleep by now, but hearing it in that room, with the sunlight streaming through the tall windows and Alex clutching Emma's hand, it felt new all over again. Then the judge turned to the children. "Alex, Emma," she said, "do you know what today is?" Alex looked up, his voice quiet but steady. "It's the day we get to stay." The judge smiled. "Yes. It's the day we make it official." "And how do you feel about that?" Emma answered before anyone else could. "Happy," she said simply, her voice light. "I want to stay forever." Michael swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. The judge nodded, signed the final pages, and then looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Carter, I want to commend you, not just for stepping in, but for staying. For standing beside them even when it wasn't simple or convenient. This court recognizes your petition and hereby grants the adoption of Alex and Emma Carter as permanent, legal members of your family." There was a silence that followed, not from uncertainty, but reverence. And then Emma leaned against Michael's side, and Alex did something he hadn't done before in front of anyone. He smiled wide, unguarded, like someone who had finally stopped running. Later that day, back at the house, they celebrated with ice cream on the porch and balloons that Michael had picked up himself early that morning. There were no photographers, no staged photos, just them and a few close friends from the hospital staff who had become family. Alex gave Emma a small box tied with ribbon. Inside was a silver pendant in the shape of a heart, and when she opened it, there was a single word engraved inside: stronger. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and fireflies blinked in the tall grass, Michael stood on the back deck and watched the children chase each other barefoot across the yard. Their laughter echoed into the sky like music. He had spent a lifetime building empires, mastering logic, controlling risk. But none of it had prepared him for this: the chaos and beauty of parenting, the terrifying vulnerability of loving people you couldn't bear to lose. And yet, standing there, watching them move like sunlight over water, he knew he had never made a better decision. He had given them a home. But they had given him something even greater. A reason. A second chance. And a future he never saw coming, but now couldn't imagine living without. This story is a quiet kind of miracle, the kind that doesn't come with lightning or applause, but with a decision, a moment of human decency that shifts the course of multiple lives. What moved me most wasn't just Michael's transformation from a distant, calculating man into a father, but the way that transformation was earned. It didn't come from guilt or a public gesture. It came from presence, from staying when it was easier to walk away, from listening to the small voices that so often go unheard. There's something deeply hopeful here, the idea that 1 minute of compassion, from the right person at the right time, can unravel a lifetime of silence and fear. That the strongest bonds can be formed not by blood, but by choice. And that even in a world hardened by routine, wealth, and survival, there's still room for redemption, not dramatic, not glamorous, but raw and real. At its heart, this isn't a story about saving others. It's about what happens when we let others save us too.
The millionaire's ex-wife. A shocking encounter that changed everything. He was dining alone, a millionaire used to getting his way, when he saw her. His ex-wife. And with her, 3 girls who looked exactly like him. Before we dive in, Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Enjoy the story, and don't forget to like this video. Comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories. On a typical Tuesday night in Manhattan, Charles Sterling, in his bespoke Italian shoes, walked into the Eden, a high-end restaurant on the Upper East Side. The maitre d' greeted him with a familiar nod. "Your usual table is ready, Mr. Sterling," Javier said, leading him to a corner table with a view of Central Park. A young sommelier approached with the wine list, but Charles waved him off. "The usual Bordeaux, please, Thomas." As Thomas went to fetch the wine, Charles idly scrolled through his phone. 3 missed calls from his mother. Probably another attempt to set him up with someone. She still hadn't forgiven him for letting Aurora go 9 years ago. The memory of Aurora Castillo still stung like a paper cut, small but sharp, making itself known when he least expected it. He was about to check his emails when a sound caught his attention. A familiar laugh that sent shivers down his spine. A laugh that haunted his memories, the one that used to wake him up on quiet Sunday mornings. He instinctively turned his head towards the sound, and the world seemed to stop. There, being led to a table on the other side of the restaurant, was Aurora. Her chestnut hair, now cut just below her shoulders, fell in elegant waves and still moved with the grace that had captivated him back in their university days. She wore a dark green dress that enhanced the sparkle in her eyes, even from that distance. But it wasn't just her presence that took his breath away. Next to her, walking like small reflections of their mother, were 3 girls. All shared Aurora's chestnut hair, and as they got closer, Charles could see his own gray eyes in them. They looked to be about 9 years old. It wasn't hard to do the math. Charles's hand clenched on the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles turned white. One of the girls carried a book and walked with her head down, almost bumping into a waiter. Another observed everything around her with an insatiable curiosity, noticing every detail as if memorizing it forever. The third walked tall, with an impeccable posture that painfully reminded Charles of his own mother. He watched, paralyzed, as they sat down at a table just 2 sections away from his, so close that he could hear snippets of their conversation, so close that it was impossible for Aurora not to notice him. Thomas returned with the wine, but Charles barely registered his presence. His mind raced with memories. The last time he saw Aurora, their final argument about him taking over the family company instead of venturing out together, how she had disappeared without a trace afterward. He had tried to find her, but she had changed her number, moved away, and her family had closed ranks. Now he understood why. One of the girls, the curious one, was already looking at him, tilting her head slightly, as if trying to solve a puzzle. He could see his own reflection in her gaze, and it made his heart race. The weight of what he had lost, of what he had never known, threatened to crush him if he got up and left. Should he confront her? Should he pretend he hadn't seen them? 9 years of business training, of making million-dollar decisions in seconds, and none of it had prepared him for this moment. Then Aurora looked up, and their eyes met across the restaurant. Charles's face paled, and the menu he was holding slipped from his hands, clattering against the fine china. For what seemed like an eternity, neither of them moved. The bustle of the restaurant faded away, leaving only the sound of Charles's heart pounding in his ears. The curious girl, he couldn't help but think of her as his daughter now, tugged on Aurora's sleeve and whispered something that brought her back to reality. "Mom, why does that man look so much like the picture in your memory box?" The girl's voice was clear enough for Charles to hear, and each word felt like another crack in the wall he had carefully built around his past. Aurora quickly regained her composure, years of keeping it together, her experience as a high school drama teacher, were evident. "Camilla, honey, please focus on choosing something to eat." But her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the fallen menu, and Charles could see her chest rising and falling rapidly, a sure sign of her nervousness. The bookish daughter was eyeing her novel, A Wrinkle in Time, and looked at him with an intensity that reminded him of seeing himself in a mirror. The third girl, the one with perfect posture, whispered something to her sisters that made them all giggle, although their mother's face remained tense. Charles left his wine untouched, the condensation beating on the glass like the sweat forming on his palms. 1,000 questions swirled in his head. Why hadn't she told him? How could she have kept it from him? What were their names? Did they know anything about him? The weight of 9 years of missed bedtime stories and first days of school pressed on his chest. His phone vibrated. Another call from his mother. If she only knew he was a grandfather of triplets. The idea almost made him laugh at the absurdity of it all. His mother, who had been insisting on grandchildren for years, had 3 she had never met. Javier approached Aurora's table with his typical gesture, and Charles could hear him greet them. "Ah, Mrs. Castillo, welcome back." And to the young ladies, Camila, Valeria, and Sophia. "What a pleasure to see you again. You're regulars." How had he not run into them before? The names resonated in his mind. Camila, Valeria, Sophia. He associated them with what he had observed. Camila must be the curious one. Valeria, the reader, and Sophia, the perfect lady. They were beautiful names, just the unique and meaningful choices he would expect from Aurora. He had always been fascinated by how nature and humanity intertwine, always dreamed of names that told stories. "Mom!" Valeria's voice was softer than Camilla's, but just as clear. "Isn't that the man from your old business plan? The one in the coffee shop picture?" Aurora blushed, and Charles remembered their shared dream, a chain of artistic coffee shops called Castillo Blanco that would blend her creativity with his business acumen. The plan. They had spent countless nights perfecting that dream, which dissolved when he decided to take over the family company's stores. Sophia, always serene, meticulously aligned her silverware and spoke with poise. "Mother, I believe it would be impolite to stare, even if he does bear a striking resemblance to us." Aurora cut her off, her voice tense but polite. "Please, let's just enjoy our celebratory dinner." Celebration? Charles's mind was racing. What were they celebrating? Had he missed a birthday or an achievement? How many other celebrations had he missed? He found himself standing without consciously deciding to. He felt like his legs were made of wood. As he took the first step towards the table, he saw Aurora's eyes widen and her hand instinctively reach out, as if to protect her daughters. Their daughters. Thomas appeared at his side. "Sir, is everything all right with the wine?" Charles barely heard him. 9 years of leading board meetings had taught him to make decisions with firmness. Even though his inner world was crumbling, each step towards the table felt like walking through a deep current. But he kept moving forward. He needed to know. He needed to understand. The girls watched him approach, each with a different expression. Camilla's evident curiosity, Valeria's perceptive assessment over her book, and Sophia's observant calm. 3 distinct versions of his own face looked back at him, mixed with Aurora's features in a way that made his heart ache. Aurora stood up just as he reached their table, placing herself in front of the girls in an instinctive protective gesture. Up close, he could see that the years had treated her well. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, with small lines around her eyes that indicated a life filled with laughter he hadn't been a part of. "Charles," she said, her voice barely audible, but still with that musicality that had always made him smile every morning. Now, it tied a knot in his chest filled with regret. "Aurora," he managed to say, though his voice sounded foreign to him. Then, unable to stop himself, he looked at each of the girls. And Camilla, Valeria, and Sophia. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla was the first to break the tension, leaning forward over the table despite Sophia's disapproving look. "So, you're him, the man from the coffee shop plans. Mom keeps them at home." "Camilla," Aurora warned, her voice trembling slightly. The restaurant continued its elegant dance of waiters and quiet conversations, oblivious to the emotional earthquake unfolding at their table. "Please," Charles said, his voice raw with emotion. "May I sit down?" He gestured to an empty chair at their table, his eyes fixed on Aurora's face. She hesitated, then nodded slightly and leaned back in her seat. Valeria carefully marked her place in her book and set it aside. Her gray eyes, the same as his, watched him with an intensity that tightened his throat. "Mom says you're very good at business," she said matter-of-factly. "She uses your company's success as a case study in her economics class." Charles raised his eyebrows, looking at Aurora. "Economics?" A slight blush colored her cheeks. "I now teach business and drama at Wellington High. The students really respond to real-world examples." Sophia, even more upright, added, "Our mother is the youngest department head. She's very talented." A protective pride filled Charles's voice. Someone had taught these girls to look after their mother, to be her champions. Someone who wasn't him. "That doesn't surprise me," he said softly, remembering how Aurora had always been the smartest person in any room, even if she never showed it. "You always had a gift. For teaching, for helping people discover their potential." "How did she do it with you?" Camilla asked innocently, although there was nothing innocent about how the question made Aurora pale. Memories flooded him. Aurora staying up late to help him study for his business finals, her brilliant suggestions during his internship presentations, how she had always pushed him to think big, to dream bolder, until he had chosen the safe path instead of their shared dream. "Yes," he answered honestly, looking directly at Aurora. "Exactly like that." A waiter approached their table, hesitated at the obvious tension, and then cleared his throat. "Shall I add anything else, madam?" "Sterling?" Before Aurora could answer, Sophia intervened with perfect social grace. "Yes, please. Today we are celebrating our academic achievements, and it seems appropriate that all interested parties be present." She emphasized the last words in such a way that Charles wondered how much these girls knew about him. "Academic achievements?" he seized the opportunity to ask. Valeria smiled slightly. "We each received a special recognition. I won the regional science fair with my project on sustainable urban agriculture." Camilla almost bounced in her seat. "I got the lead role in the school play. It's The Wizard of Oz. I'm playing Dorothy." "And I," said Sophia proudly, "was elected the youngest student body president in the school's history." Charles felt like he had been punched in the stomach. They were so accomplished, so brilliant, so much like him and Aurora in different ways. His eyes burned as he looked at Aurora. "They're incredible," he murmured. "They are," she agreed softly, and then added, a hint of steel in her voice. "They already had everything they needed." The unspoken words hung in the air. They didn't need you. But looking at these three extraordinary girls, his daughters, Charles wasn't so sure anymore. The waiter returned with the silverware, and as he placed it down, Charles noticed something that chilled him to the bone. In Valeria's book was a familiar leather bookmark, one he had given Aurora years ago, engraved with her favorite quote. "Some infinities are bigger than other infinities." She had kept it. All this time. She had kept it, and now her daughter was using it, probably without knowing its significance. How many other parts of him had Aurora woven into her daughters' lives without them knowing? "Mr. Sterling," Sophia said formally, pulling him from his thoughts. "Since you are joining our celebratory dinner, Perhaps you would also be interested to know about our plans for the future. We have been very strategic in our approach to high school. High school. The words hit him like stones. His daughters were planning their future, and he barely knew them. The weight of everything he had lost pressed down on him, threatening to crush him completely. The waiter arrived with the menus, offering a momentary reprieve from the tension. Charles watched as each girl handled the menu differently. Valeria methodically evaluating the options, Camila flipping through the pages with enthusiasm, and Sophia carefully examining the wine list, despite being too young to order. "The coca uven is excellent here," Charles commented automatically, and then realized he was giving menu suggestions to his own daughters, as if they were colleagues. The absurdity of the situation threatened to overwhelm him. "It's Mom's favorite dish," Camila said cheerfully. "She always orders it on special occasions." She paused, tilting her head. "Did you know that? Is that why you're ordering it too?" Aurora's hand tightened on her water glass. "Camila, remember what we've discussed about asking personal questions." "But Mom," Camila protested, "you always say that knowledge is power, and Mr. Sterling seems to know a lot about you. Besides, he has the same gray eyes as us, and the same furrow between his eyebrows when he thinks hard, just like Sophia when she prepares her speeches for student council." Valeria looked up from the menu, her analytical mind piecing things together. "And he has the same habit of touching his left fist when he's nervous, just like me during science presentations." "Girls," Aurora's voice was strained. "Please no," Charles intervened softly. "They deserve answers." He looked at each girl in turn, then at Aurora. "They deserve the truth." "The truth." Sophia's voice was cautious, measured. "About why your picture is in Mom's memory box. About why she keeps the old Castillo Blanco business plans in her desk drawer. About why she always gets quiet on Father's Day." Aurora fell completely silent, and Charles felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He hadn't known about Father's Day, hadn't known she still thought about then. "Or perhaps," Sophia continued with the same precision, "about why Mom accepted that teaching position at Wellington High 9 years ago, even though it was on the other side of the country from where he was building his company." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Wellington High was in Seattle. That's why he had never seen them here. They must be in New York for a special occasion. The regional science fair, the school play, the student council position. These weren't just common achievements. They were the reasons they had returned to the city where it had all begun. "You moved to Seattle," he said quietly, looking at Aurora. "That's why I could never find you." "I had to," she whispered, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes. "You had chosen your path. I had to choose mine." "Without telling me anything about them?" The words came out sharper than he intended, and he saw the 3 girls flinch slightly. "You made it very clear that Castillo Blanco was your priority," Aurora said, her voice tight. "The night you told me you were taking over the company instead of starting Castillo Blanco with me, you said, and I quote, 'Some dreams have to die so others can live.' Remember?" "Yes, I remember." He had been so sure he was doing the right thing, following in his father's footsteps, securing their future. Their future, he had thought at the time. He hadn't known that future was already forming inside her. 3 little lives that would inherit his gray eyes and her tenacious spirit. 3 weeks after that night, Aurora continued, her voice barely audible. "I found out I was pregnant with triplets. I went to your office to tell you." Charles's stomach clenched. He knew exactly what she was going to say next. The memory of that day had haunted him for years, though for completely different reasons than he had imagined. "But you were in a board meeting," she finished for him, her voice hoarse. "And your assistant told me you were too busy to see anyone, not even me, that you had told them not to disturb you under any circumstances." Camila exhaled softly as Valeria's hand found her mother's under the table. Sophia's perfect posture faltered for the first time as she looked at her parents. "You never came back," Charles said, and the realization hit him like a punch. "That was the last time you tried to contact me." "What would have been the point?" Aurora asked, and now the tears were flowing freely. "You had made your decision. Your father's company. Your legacy. I wasn't going to trap you in a life you hadn't chosen." The silence that followed was only broken by the soft clinking of fine china at nearby tables. Charles looked at his hands spread out on the immaculate white tablecloth, trying to grasp the magnitude of what he had lost, with a simple order to his assistant. "No interruptions." "You thought you were protecting me," he said slowly, looking at Aurora. "By not telling me, you thought you were freeing me to pursue my ambitions? Weren't those ambitions worth more to you than anything else?" The bitterness in her voice was tinged with an old pain. "The great Charles Sterling, following in his father's footsteps. Building an empire. An empty empire," he replied, his voice breaking. "Do you know what I did with Castillo Blanco? Our plans?" All four of them looked at him with identical curiosity. Even Sophia seemed to forget her perfect posture as she leaned forward slightly. "I built it anyway, 3 years ago. Not as our chain of coffee shops, but as a charitable foundation. It funds arts education and business training for underprivileged youth, because every time I passed a coffee shop, I remembered our dream. I remembered you." Aurora brought her hand to her mouth. "The Castillo Blanco Foundation. It's yours." "It's mine," she confirmed, and then looked at the girls. "And now I suppose it's theirs, too." Valeria's analytical mind was clearly racing, in addition to everything else. "The foundation that funded our school's new performing arts center. It's named after Mom. It's named after both of you," Charles said softly. "Castillo Blanco." I never stopped thinking about what we could have built together. Camila, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke. "Mom cries every time she reads about the foundation in the newspaper. She keeps all the articles in her—" "Camila," Sophia interrupted, showing a protectiveness that tugged at Charles's heart. These girls had grown up watching their mother carry this burden alone. "No, it's okay," Aurora said, dabbing her eyes with her napkin. "They should know. I kept all the articles because I wanted you girls to know that Mr. Sterling, does good things in the world. That it's not just about profit margins and corporate takeovers." "But you never told him about us," Valeria said, a hint of accusation in her voice. "We could have known him. We could have been part of that good work." "Would you have wanted that?" Charles asked suddenly, looking at each girl in turn. "To know me? To be part of my life? We already are, in a way," Sophia replied diplomatically. "Our mother made sure we knew about Blanco Technologies' environmental initiatives. We follow your company's charitable works. We even," she glanced at her sisters, who nodded encouragingly, "even bought shares in the company with our allowance last year. 1 share each." Charles felt his heart swell. "Your shareholders, very small ones," Valeria clarified. "But we wanted to own a piece of your world, even if you didn't know about us." "I would have given you the world," Charles whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I've built, everything I am. It would have been yours. It should have been yours." "And now?" Camila asked, her usual bubbly curiosity replaced by an almost desperate hope. "Could it be ours now?" Aurora took her daughter's hand, but Charles spoke first. "It already is. Whether you want it or not, whether you're ready or not, everything I have is yours. My name, my company, my foundation, and my heart. If you want it." Aurora's breath hitched. "Charles, you can't just—" "Can't just what?" His voice was soft but firm. "Can't just offer my daughters what is rightfully theirs? Can't just try to make up for 9 lost years?" "It's not that simple," Aurora protested. But Sophia interrupted her with an uncharacteristic emotion in her usually controlled voice. "Why not?" she asked, her perfect composure cracking a little. We've spent our whole lives knowing half of who we are, reading about our father in business magazines, watching his interviews on CNBC, pretending we're only interested in the business success stories. She paused, recomposing herself. When we just wanted to know if we inherited our love for numbers from him or from you. The numbers are definitely from him, Aurora said softly, a small smile playing on her lips. I was always the creative one. But both are in us, Valeria observed, her analytical mind working overtime. Like when Camila acts. She has your dramatic flair, Mom, but Dad's strategic thinking when approaching each role. The word Dad hung in the air like a fragile soap bubble, and Charles's heart skipped a beat at hearing it for the first time. And when Sophia runs student council meetings, Camila added, enthusiastic about the topic. She uses Mom's teaching techniques, but Dad's negotiation strategies. We've watched all your TED Talks, Dad, Sophia added, looking at Charles slightly flushed. All of them? Charles asked, his voice thick with emotion. Valeria confirmed several times. We've analyzed your speaking patterns, your management philosophies, your approach to corporate responsibility. It's like we've been studying for an exam we never thought we'd take. The waiter approached again, looking unsure. Would you like to order? Yes, Sophia said decisively, taking charge again. I think we all need a moment to properly review the menus, and perhaps, she added with a meaningful look at her mother, consider new possibilities. As everyone picked up their menus, Charles noticed that Aurora's hands were trembling slightly. He wanted to reach out and calm them, as he used to before her drama performances in college. But he no longer had that right. Oh, Aurora, he said quietly as the girls debated appetizers. I know this is overwhelming for everyone, but they are extraordinary. You did an incredible job raising them, and if you'll let me, I would like to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve them. Trying to deserve you. We can't just erase 9 years, she whispered. No, he agreed. But maybe we can build something new. Something even better than Castillo Blanco. Before Aurora could respond, Camilla's voice interrupted with her characteristic enthusiasm. Mom, they have your favorite chocolate souffle for dessert. Remember you said it reminded you of your first date? She stopped abruptly, looking at her parents with wide eyes. Oh, with Dad. Here, in this restaurant. The memory hit them both at the same time. Their first date at the Eden, barely affordable on their grad student budgets, sharing the same souffle because they could only afford one dessert between them. Had Aurora been coming here all these years, ordering the same dessert, keeping that memory alive? Her gaze told him everything he needed to know. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss any of the incredible stories we'll be posting soon. Your support greatly helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more of what you love. Thank you. The waiter returned to take their order, creating a brief respite from the emotional intensity. Charles couldn't help but notice how each girl ordered, Valeria, requesting detailed information about the preparation methods, Camila choosing with impulsive enthusiasm, and Sophia negotiating a subtle menu modification with diplomatic skill. Like a board meeting, he murmured, earning an inquisitive look from Aurora. The analyst, the innovator, and the negotiator. They're like the perfect corporate team. They're not a corporate team, Aurora said sharply, and then softened. They're just girls. They're girls who need to be allowed to just be girls. Charles nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. I think I'm trying to find ways to connect with them through the only world I've known for the past 9 years. We don't mind, Valeria interjected, who had clearly been listening. In fact, I wanted to ask you about your recent shift towards sustainable technology investments. The market analysis you published last quarter suggested... Valeria, Aurora interrupted gently. Perhaps we could save the business conversation for when? Sophia challenged, surprising everyone with her intensity. For another 9 years? Mom, we've spent our lives tiptoeing around this, around him, around who we are. Maybe it's time to stop pretending we're just 3 random talented students from Wellington High. Camilla nodded vigorously. Yeah. You know how hard it is to pretend we don't notice when business newspapers have Dad's picture on the cover? Or when other kids talk about the Castillo Blanco Foundation's latest project? Or when Grandma Sterling tells us we have our father's business sense but refuses to say anything else about him? Only by accident, Sophia clarified. Usually, after her second glass of wine at Christmas dinners, she keeps a picture of you and Mom from college in her study, but she turns it face down every time we visit. The mention of Margaret Sterling brought another wave of memories. Her unwavering support for his relationship with Aurora in college, her devastation when they broke up. He had always wondered if she knew about the girls, if she had played a part in the decision to keep them from him. She never forgave me, he said quietly, for choosing the company over her daughter. Over all of us, Aurora corrected, but now her voice sounded less harsh. Though I suppose we didn't give you a chance to choose otherwise. Would you have chosen differently? Camilla asked suddenly. If you had known about us. The question hung in the air like a sustained note in a symphony. Charles looked at each of their faces, those extraordinary girls who carried his DNA, but who had been molded by Aurora's love and guidance. He thought of the lonely years at the top of Blanco Technology, the empty victory of each successful merger, the empty penthouse he returned to each night. In a heartbeat, he answered, his voice rough with conviction. Everything I've built, everything I've achieved, means nothing compared to what I missed with you, with all of you. Aurora audibly caught her breath, and he saw tears welling in her eyes again. The girls exchanged glances, a kind of silent communication between them. Well, Sophia said, straightening her silverware with deliberate precision. Perhaps it's not too late to make a different decision. The arrival of the appetizers provided a moment of normalcy in the surreal evening. Charles watched as Valeria methodically photographed her plate for research purposes, while Camilla dove in with enthusiasm, and Sophia waited for everyone to start before taking her first bite. So, Charles ventured, you're all in Seattle, at Wellington High. Not for long, Camilla said eagerly, and quickly covered her mouth when Sophia shot her a warning look. Oops, Aurora sighed, putting down her fork. We were going to announce this tonight. Before all of this, I was offered a position as the head of creative arts and business education at Riverside Academy, here in New York. Charles's heart skipped a beat. Riverside? That's 10 minutes from Blanco Technology headquarters. We know, Valeria said meaningfully. We thoroughly researched the school's location in relation to various points of interest in the city. The girls were accepted into their gifted program, and Aurora gradually joined in. Full scholarships. We were planning to move here this summer before the new school year. The past tense immediately caught Charles's attention. Mom, surely this doesn't change our plans. If anything, Valeria interjected, the proximity to both parents could provide enhanced opportunities for academic and personal growth. Camilla nodded enthusiastically. Besides, their drama department is amazing, and they have a business innovation club that works directly with real companies. And she trailed off, looking at him hopefully. And perhaps, she said carefully, they might be interested in working with the Castillo Blanco Foundation, or even Blanco Technology's youth mentorship program. Charles, Aurora warned, but he could see the resolve weakening in her eyes. I'm not trying to buy their affection, he said quickly, but these programs exist. They're designed precisely for the kind of bright young minds I see at this table. Their father, Aurora repeated softly, testing the words. It's still so strange to hear it out loud. Strange but true, Sophia declared with her characteristic diplomacy. And as the elected student body president of my school, I can state with some authority that refusing to acknowledge the truth rarely leads to productive outcomes. Valeria put down her fork with scientific precision. I've been analyzing the variables influencing our potential relocation, the academic opportunities, the cultural advantages, the proximity to extended family, including newly discovered family. She glanced at Charles. The data strongly supports the decision, and I've already memorized my audition monologue for Riverside's drama club, Camilla added. It's from that play you did with Mom in college. Mom? The Glass Menagerie. Aurora's hand trembled as she picked up her water glass. You found our old program in your memory box, the three girls said in unison, and then laughed at their synchronicity. That memory box has a lot to say, Charles said with a small smile, and then turned serious. But perhaps it was about saving these memories until we were ready to face them, until we were ready to create new ones. Mom keeps saying we shouldn't live in the past, Sophia pointed out, that we should always look forward, plan for the future. The future, Charles repeated thoughtfully. You know, I've spent 9 years planning a future. I thought I wanted board meetings, acquisitions, expansions. But sitting here now, looking at all of you, I realize I've been planning the wrong future all along. The main courses arrived, steaming and artfully presented, but no one seemed particularly interested in the food. Charles watched as Aurora, unconsciously, smoothed Camilla's napkin, a maternal instinct he hadn't seen develop. I have a confession to make, he said, suddenly causing all four of them to look up from their Tuesday night dinner reservation. It wasn't just a habit. I kept it because... She paused, gathering her courage. Because this was our night. A date every Tuesday for 2 years in college. I guess I never let it go. Just like my mother never gave up on the coffee shop dream, Valeria observed. She has 3 different business plans in her desk, each updated to current market conditions. Aurora blushed. You went through my desk? For research purposes, Sophia clarified diplomatically. We were trying to understand everything. Everything we missed, Charles said quietly. Everything I missed. First steps, first words, first business proposals, Camilla added with a grin. We tried to sell lemonade futures in the yard last year. Futures. Charles couldn't help but laugh. How did that work out? We cornered the market by pre-selling to the teachers, Valeria explained. Then we reinvested the profits in a cookie venture that Sophia negotiated with the school cafeteria, Camilla added proudly. The profit margins were quite respectable, Sophia said, straightening up. Though Mom made us donate most of it to the school library. Aurora shook her head, but she was smiling. I should have known they inherited that entrepreneurial spirit from you. They've been running small businesses since they were 6, Charles said, his voice cracking slightly. 6. What was your first venture? The girls exchanged glances before Valeria answered. We sold friendship bracelets, but with a twist. We offered an insurance policy. If the friendship ended, they could return the bracelet and get store credit. Store credit? Charles looked at Aurora in amazement. At 6 years old, they implemented a whole return policy system, she confirmed, with a customer satisfaction survey included. The data helped us improve our product line, Valeria explained seriously. Charles felt tears pricking his eyes again. They were so much like him, but so uniquely them, so shaped by Aurora's guidance, but with his business instincts in their DNA. I want to know everything, he said suddenly, his voice intense. Every business, every play, every science project. I want to know about their first day of school, their favorite books, their biggest dreams. He looked at Aurora pleadingly. I want to be their father, not just biologically, but their dad, if you'll let me. We want that too, Sophia said softly, speaking for all 3 girls. We've already achieved so much, but she looked at her sisters, who nodded encouragingly. But we've always felt like there was a vital member missing from our board of directors in our lives. That's a very professional way to put it, Aurora said, but her voice was gentle. Well, we are Sterlings, Camila pointed out. Even though we've been using the last name Castillo, the silence that followed was charged with possibilities. Charles looked at Aurora, really looked at her, seeing both the girl he had loved in college and the strong woman who had raised their daughters alone. What if, he said slowly, we stopped letting the fear of the past dictate our future? What if we took all this love, all this potential, and built something new? Not just fancy coffee shops, but something bigger. A family. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. This way you won't miss any of the incredible stories we'll be posting soon. Your support greatly helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more of what you love. Thank you. Aurora dabbed her eyes with her napkin, composing herself before speaking. A family isn't built as easily as a business. It requires time, trust, and patience. Like a long-term investment, Valeria offered, earning a small smile from both parents. Exactly, Aurora agreed. And while I appreciate your enthusiasm, we need to think about what's best for the girls. We're right here, Sophia reminded them gently, and we're old enough to have a say in this corporate merger. Charles couldn't help but chuckle at their words. You're right. Perhaps we should put it to a vote. Democratic process and all that, like a shareholders meeting. Camilla bounced in her seat. Since we're all shareholders now, minority shareholders, Valeria reminded her sister. But she was smiling too. Well, Sophia said, straightening up even further. If it's permissible, as the interim chairwoman of this meeting, I propose we discuss the practicalities of integrating the CEO of Blanco Technology into our family structure. Seconded, Valeria added, immediately pulling out her phone. I've already started a list of pros and cons. Hold on, Aurora interrupted. But now there was a hint of amusement in her voice. This isn't something we can vote on over dinner. Why not? Camilla asked. We've been waiting 9 years. Isn't that enough market research? Charles leaned forward, his voice soft but urgent. Aurora, look at them. They are brilliant, thoughtful, and clearly capable of understanding complex situations. They have been observing me from afar all this time, trying to get to know their father through news and annual reports. Don't they deserve the opportunity to really know me? And you don't deserve to know them, he replied softly. The real me, not just his achievements and business ventures, but his fears, his doubts, his messy mornings, and his grumpy evenings. Everything, he said with firmness. I want it all. The good days and the bad days, the successes and the failures, the science fairs and the scraped knees. I have a scar from falling off my bike, Camilla offered helpfully. Want to see? Not at the table, darling, Aurora said automatically, and then caught herself, resorting to familiar parenting patterns in front of Charles. The reality of what sharing these moments would mean seemed to hit her hard. I have a proposal, Sophia announced, pulling out a small notebook. A phased integration plan, so to speak, starting with weekly family dinners to establish a base level of compatibility, followed by scheduled activities aligned with our individual interests. Valeria continued, quickly adapting. I have several scientific hypotheses I'd like to discuss from a fresh perspective. I need help with my Dorothy monologue, Camilla added. Mom says you were an amazing wizard in college, Dad. The word dad still sent a jolt through Charles, but this time it was accompanied by a wave of joy instead of pain. He looked at Aurora, trying to convey everything he felt with his eyes. It's evident they inherited your planning skills, he said quietly. And my determination. A dangerous combination, she agreed with a smile. One that will be impossible to resist. We know, the three girls said in unison, and then burst into giggles. The dessert menus arrived, and without further discussion, everyone knew what they would order. The chocolate soufflé that held so many memories. While they waited for it to be prepared, The conversation took a serious turn. "There's something else you should know," Aurora said, her fingers tracing the stem of her water glass. "Something I've never told anyone, not even the girls." All four of them leaned forward slightly, impressed by the gravity of her voice. "The day I found out I was pregnant, I didn't just try to tell you once. I went to your office 3 times that week. Each time your assistant told me you were too busy. The third time, I saw you through the glass walls of your office, shaking hands with your father's board members." Charles felt the color drain from his face. "The week of the merger announcement, when we were taking the company private. You looked so satisfied, so sure of your path," she continued. "I watched you for 10 minutes, standing in the lobby, with one hand on my stomach, where our daughters were growing. You didn't look up from your papers, didn't glance towards the lobby where I was waiting. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" Sophia asked softly, losing her usual composure. "That I couldn't be the one to ruin your dreams. Your father was sick. The company needed you. And a pregnancy, especially one as complicated as mine." Aurora's voice broke slightly. "I thought I was being noble, giving you the freedom to become who you were meant to be." "But both were meant to be our parents," Valeria said, her analytical tone giving way to emotion. "According to my calculations, the probability of a successful co-parenting arrangement would have been significantly higher with both parties involved from the outset." "Well said, sister," Camilla said, wiping away tears. Charles leaned across the table, hesitated for a moment, then gently took Aurora's hand. She didn't pull away. "Do you know what I was reading in those newspapers that day?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Expansion plans for a chain of coffee shops. I was trying to figure out how to buy and renovate some struggling cafes, turn them into what we dreamed of with Castillo Blanco. I thought if I could make it successful quickly enough, maybe I'd be forgiven for choosing the company first. I was going to surprise you with it." "Oh," Aurora breathed, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I've spent 9 years building someone else's dream, thinking I'd lost mine." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "But my dream wasn't just about coffee shops and business plans. It was about building something with you. And now?" "Now there's so much more to build," Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Together," Valeria added firmly. "As a family," Camilla concluded, with her characteristic enthusiasm. The soufflé arrived at the perfect moment, steaming from its dark, rich surface, just as it had 9 years ago, when 2 college graduates shared their dreams over dessert. "I propose an amendment to the integration plan," Sophia announced, sitting up straighter as she fought back tears. "Starting now? Not next week. Not after a period of adequate analysis, now." "Seconded," Valeria said immediately, her eyes suspiciously bright. "All in favor?" Camilla asked, raising her hand. 4 more hands joined hers without hesitation as they shared the soufflé. 5 spoons this time, instead of 2. Javier approached their table, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, Miss Castillo, Mr. Sterling, but it's almost closing time." They all looked up in surprise. Somehow the hours had flown by like minutes. The restaurant was almost empty, the city lights twinkling through the windows, where the sunset colors had been at the beginning. "Time flows differently when you're rewriting your future," Sophia observed. "Philosophically speaking, of course," Valeria added, pulling out her phone. "I've prepared a preliminary schedule of family activities, taking into account everyone's current commitments and optimal opportunities for bonding." "And I already told all my friends I'm getting a dad," Camilla announced, nearly making Aurora drop her spoon. "When you sent the group text," Sophia clarified. "Very efficient, though perhaps a bit premature." Charles laughed, a deep, heartfelt laugh that made all 4 of them smile. "Well, I guess that saves us the trouble of a formal announcement." "What exactly are we announcing?" Aurora asked slowly. "It's not just about you meeting the girls, Charles. This is everything." She squeezed his hand, and this time he returned the gesture. "Everything is exactly what I want. The company, the foundation, this family. They don't have to be separate dreams anymore. They can be one dream, built together with proper corporate oversight, Sophia added seriously, prompting laughter from everyone. And regular board meetings, Valeria suggested. And family game nights, Camila added. Every successful company needs team-building activities. As they gathered their things to leave, Charles paused for a moment, observing his new family. The girls were already planning the next day's activities with excited voices. Aurora watched them with a mixture of love and awe, as if seeing them from a new perspective. "You know," he said quietly, turning to her, "I always thought my father's greatest lesson was about business. Success is built on relationships," he used to say. But I was wrong for so long. He wasn't talking about business relationships. He was talking about this. He gestured to his daughters. About family. The most important merger of all, Aurora agreed. A meaningful ending. As they walked out of the Eden together, as a family for the first time, the moral of their story was clear. Sometimes, the biggest mistakes in life come from trying to protect others from our love, rather than having the courage to share it. Success isn't measured in dollars or achievements, but in the connections we forge and the love we're willing to fight for. It's never too late to correct course, to choose love over fear, to turn missed opportunities into new beginnings. The best investments we can make aren't in stocks or companies, but in the hearts of those we love. Thank you all for watching this incredible story. Don't forget to like, comment with your thoughts on this family's journey, and share this video with someone who needs to hear its message. Remember, it's never too late for love to find its way home. See you in the next video.